Okay, we're going to start with the final panel session of this forum. This panel session is titled Cybersecurity in the Development Context. And I'm really excited to present this panel because through this panel you're going to get to know a little bit more of the work that we are doing on cybersecurity at the bank. And to moderate this session, we have one of my colleagues, Ida Mbouv. She is an ICT policy specialist at the Digital Development Department. And I will say a few words of her. So Ida works in projects that focus on national and regional telecommunication infrastructure, connectivity, cybersecurity, and policy reforms. And she focuses her work in the Africa region. Before joining the bank, Ida worked in both the public and private sector, specializing in telecommunications law, regulations, and competitions. So I would like to invite to the stage Ida and her panelists. Please join us.
Thank you, Irene. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys had a really great sessions yesterday and today. We know it's the last session, so you're probably really tired, but it's probably going to be the best one because we have a really fantastic panel. As Irene said, the discussion today is going to focus on cybersecurity in the development context. So we're sort of going to be looking at what are the relevant aspects and considerations and importances that need to be focused on in order for cybersecurity to be prioritized in the development context, particularly as we're looking at the digital economy, especially when we're looking at emerging markets and how cybersecurity should become a foundation for one of the pillars for the foundation for resilience. So we have an amazing panel here with us, which we're really excited about. Right next to me is Albert. Albert is a national cybersecurity advisor from Ghana. He advises the government of Ghana through the Ministry of ICT. He focuses on national cybersecurity policy and strategy, and we're going to hear a lot about what's been happening in Ghana. The bank in particular, we're very excited about Ghana because they really push the cybersecurity agenda. Prior to joining the government of Ghana, he founded an e-crime bureau, which is based in Ghana, that looks at forensics. And he also worked at a DFL Labs, which is a global cybersecurity firm. So we're very excited to have Albert, who came in yesterday from Ghana to take part in this session, so thank you. And then right next to Albert, we have Melissa Hathaway, who I'm sure a lot of you know. She is a leading expert in cybersecurity policy and strategy. She consults with governments, global organizations, Fortune 500 companies, focusing on cybersecurity, enterprise risk management, technology assessments. She works with a lot of key government institutions and also institutions which are not necessarily government, so NATO, the ITU, and OAS. She served 2 presidential administrations, so she spearheaded the cybersecurity policy review for President Obama and also the comprehensive national cybersecurity initiative for President George Bush. She's also developed a cybersecurity readiness index, which is a great methodology that's used for evaluating and measuring the level of preparedness for certain cybersecurity risks at the national level. Right next to her, we have Jane, who is a practice manager in the digital development global practice, so she's my manager. She leads the digital development teams in many different countries, but she also focuses on Europe and Central Asia, mainly supporting clients and partners to understand and shape their digital economies and societies. Prior to that, she had a lot of experience, very senior level experience in governments, in the government in Australia, and she also had a lot of management consulting experience, specializing in citizen-driven services, shared platforms, e-payments, etc. So this is your great panel, very gender-balanced panel as well, which I might add. And we will start the session. So I think what we should talk about, especially because it's a development context, maybe to start the discussions is, we'll start with Melissa. You have a lot of global experience in developing countries, and a lot of the discussion has been about prioritizing cybersecurity and how do we make sure that governments put the necessary investments to build it. What has been your experience in terms of what needs to be done to promote this more, and has there been a difference at all between how it's prioritized in developed countries versus developing countries?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here today and helping the World Bank as a partner. I look at what's going on around the world as all of our countries are really accelerating and embracing the digitization and modernization of our core infrastructures. And this year alone, this market opportunity in 2018 is worth $3.7 trillion for our organizations to adopt the next generation technology, U.S. citizens to embrace the next iPhone or iPad. And as we look in the developing world to connect more and more of our citizens to that internet economy and enabling for the gaining knowledge through the internet, which enables skills development, which then should lead to job opportunities and overall GDP growth. The current digital economy globally is 7% of GDP. And it's on its path to be 25% of GDP by 2025. And so when we start to look at the countries all around the world, everybody's trying to embrace this overall economic opportunity. And you start to see digital agendas that are merging in each of the different countries. And you're starting to see overall infrastructure modernization, and even many of the bank's initiatives are all about digitization of these countries to help our citizens gain access to that, to the internet and high-speed communications to enable the applications development and other things on top of the economy. Unfortunately, though, as we embrace this digital economy, not enough of our countries are looking at the resilience that is required as we digitize all of these core infrastructures. And in principle, we have actually allowed for, in the last 30 years, all of our countries to have these really basically poorly designed components in the core of our infrastructure with the promise of I'm going to field it fast and we'll fix it later. And that's a real problem. And so when you start to think about a Patch Tuesday that comes once a month that represents 40 to 60 critical vulnerabilities for the core of your critical services and infrastructures, your financial institutions, your judicial institutions, your energy institutions, et cetera, that presents a real risk to our countries. And so as our countries start to see that they've got a problem, we're implementing programs like critical infrastructures and identifying critical infrastructures, but we're not necessarily thinking about risk management at an overall national level. And if you start to think about risk management at an overall national level, I want to embrace and adopt this digital economy, 7% moving to 25%, and get all of my people connected. And this is going to represent my strategy. So, but if your strategy is unachievable based on this inherent vulnerability in those core infrastructures, you have to co-invest. And that's currently not happening from a governance perspective in most of our countries. We have one part of our government driving us down this digital economy, connect anything and everything to the internet as fast as possible. We'll worry about it later. And then we have a different part of our government all thinking about cybersecurity or critical infrastructure protection, national security. It really depends on which government or which country we live in of what voice that is. And so I look at this as the threat is real and growing, and the volume and velocity of attacks against our core infrastructures is becoming a real issue that's in the headlines every day. And then let me just give you a few examples. We have the motives that people are using these basically weapons that are affordable on the internet varies. We have some who are, I would say, political activists, who either don't like what your corporation is doing or what your government is doing, and so they face a website, or they'll hack your email account and they'll expose your emails, etc. But then we have a second set of motives is that personal identifiable information, your national identity card, your credit card, other different protected data is actually monetizable on the underground internet. So if I can actually steal it from an institution or a retail center or et cetera, then I can actually sell that and make a lot of money. And that's happening all the time, right? And I was in Canada yesterday, and the largest restaurateur in Canada had all of their restaurants had all of your credit card data was all stolen this week. And I can guarantee you those credit cards are already been sold on the internet. The third area that we're seeing across the world is broad-based theft of intellectual property. Why are we worried about that? Well, if your company in your country, your national champion is really unique at doing something, mineral mining or oil and gas extraction, or in this country, defense industry or other things, and your information, your property is illegally copied and taken to another country to advance another country, that becomes a problem, because that's your market opportunity going forward. It's your ability to capture that digital economy. And there are countries and there are companies and there are institutions that are out there outright trying to steal everybody's intellectual property. And then we see two other emerging motives that are happening on a more regular basis. Distributed denial of service, to knock you offline when you needed to be online. So they're making it so that it's difficult for the free flow of goods, services, data, and capital across borders. And then finally, destruction of property. So just a few examples, right? I don't know if you read recently, but that the Port of San Diego is actually suffering from a ransomware attack right now, right? And the Port of San Diego in the United States, if you have many of its systems are encrypted and I can't actually operate and use that, it's one of our #1 ports in the United States. It represents more than 2% of our economy. And when you start to think about this, of ports around the world, if they're actually affected by organized crime or by other institutions trying to knock them offline when they need to be online, that affects the national economy of a country. Are these ports part of our national security strategies or critical infrastructure protection? Not in many countries, they haven't been identified as that. And that becomes a challenge, because there's a disconnect between the digital opportunity and the economic opportunity and the needs for the security around it. Another example would be that we just saw a very malicious, destructive software used in Saudi Arabia. And it was against an oil and gas institution, and the malware was actually to turn off the safety mechanisms within that overall infrastructure. So what would happen with that? You could potentially have an oil and gas spill, or even worse, an explosion. And so you start to see destructive activities going against national assets that we have to actually think about from a security and resilience perspective. And then last summer, we saw another destructive software used against corporations globally. It was called NotPetya, and it was actually targeting an accounting software that many of our companies used around the world. And one company that was affected was in Denmark. It was Maersk Shipping. They're the #1 shipping container company globally, right? So what happened to them? In less than a couple of hours, this destructive software literally wiped out 45,000 computers, 4,000 servers, 2,500 applications, and knocked Maersk offline when it needed to be online, and they couldn't service 76 ports around the world. It cost them hundreds of millions of dollars, and it affected the global economy for months because we had such a disruption into overall commerce. So when I think about cybersecurity, I think about the need for embracing this digital economy, the need for embracing these new technologies, but doing so with thinking about how those technologies will be turned off when they need to be on, how the software will be corrupted, and how it could be used for harm against not only our countries, but our corporations and our citizens, that would cause economic instability, social instability, and then therefore sovereign insecurity that must be addressed. As Ida talked about, I have developed a cyber readiness index that looks at how do you think about becoming cyber ready, embracing that digital economy, but then ensuring that you have the resilience and security built into it, so you harmonize the two agendas as opposed to sub-optimize the overall national strategy. I'm happy to talk about that further, but I just wanted to kind of give an opening remarks of big picture of that. The economy and the security are intertwined and entangled, but currently our countries are embracing one without the other.
Thank you. And Jane, just following off from that, I mean, Melissa talked about the risks of personal data. She talked about, IP theft and this push to grow the digital economy, push for a digital agenda, and all the risks that come out of that. And now at the bank, I mean, that's the digital development team, that's what we focus on. You support developing countries to leapfrog development by pushing the digital agenda, digital economy. Let's transform public services. Let's have identification for development. A lot of the foundation is digital. What do we do at the bank, or what do you think is the one thing that we could do to make sure that getting these two governments that she referenced, you've got one government thinking about cybersecurity and a completely different side of government thinking about, I just want to move my digital economy, and there's no connect. What do you think is the one thing that they could do or that we could do to support them to get that connect moving?
Thanks for the question, and thank you for reminding me, Melissa, of just how much you know and how much, I think for those of us who were here yesterday morning and saw the picture of the shark and the Jaws movie, you've reminded me of it's coming, but we need to actually be prepared. And I think that optimistic notion of the world is there for grabbing, or the economy can be grown digitally without actually contemplating where the risks are, and they're so serious these days. We too are finding that there's the need not just to digitalise businesses and citizen services, but mindsets. And the mindsets are not just the ones about the traditional way of doing business or providing government services, not just the prospects of doing things in an enlightened digital 21st century way, but also taking both sides of the coin, both the optimistic prospects of digitalisation, but also being really ready for the fact that in an uber-connected world, the weakest link that could be on the other side of the world can actually bring you down. And I think that the World Bank's projects that have certainly pursued the foundation work for digital economy, digital government, looking at particular capabilities and sectors, are now also aware of the need to complement both the good with the forces of darkness, as I used to say when I was the Chief Information Officer in Australia, because you're not quite sure where they're going to come from, but you have to be ready. The World Bank World Development Report in 2016 on digital dividends identified cybersecurity as a priority for the World Bank Group in its work and investments, but also in terms of looking at the conditions that the developing countries and our clients are having to tackle in both their emerging economies and what they need to do from a capacity building perspective. We have entered into a series of partnerships with various external development partners and cybersecurity specialist organisations to support the global advancement of cybersecurity capacity across and within developing countries. This capacity building covers a number of areas, bringing people face to face with what some of the advanced countries are doing to create a resilient environment and style of work that governments and corporations and small businesses and individuals can do. The study tours, the regional clinics, the technical assistance and knowledge sharing are all part of that. The objective of these partnerships is to essentially help digitalise and raise the awareness of the leaders, the ministers, the people that are actually allocated the task of making their countries secure. You know, this could be 3 people in a Southeast Asian country, or the Director General of Kenya, who on this exposure through one of these study tours realised that in rejecting the requests from his cyber team for increased funds, it wasn't just a grab for funds, it was a desperate need, and he went back and tripled the budget. I think the bank recognises that we can draw on the expertise of other agencies and governments, and in doing so, we have special relationships with the Israeli government, the Japanese government, the Cyber Security Capacity Centre of Oxford University, and with these countries, as well as with Korea, they respond to and support the sort of study tours and capacity building and exposure of the developing countries to what they are doing, how they are tackling, monitoring cybersecurity status, where they spend their money, and also provide assistance across. I think this will continue to grow. We in the World Bank Digital Development Group are not experts in cybersecurity, but we're expert in knowing who is, and to look at how we can bring that expertise to the door of the countries that are having to both grow as fast as they can, exploiting the benefits of connectivity that they can get, but also doing it in a safe, resilient way. I think that's probably my final message is actually going back to the start. We talk about digitalising economies, businesses, governments. One of the key things we've got to do is digitalise the mindsets in terms of preparation and delivery. Thanks.
Thank you. Speaking of digitalizing mindsets, Albert. So Albert Warlucky is from as I said, the government of Ghana, and is one of our client countries that we work with. We have operational projects in Ghana, eTransform, but we also have different initiatives with them. And in Ghana, you've been able to prioritize cybersecurity. Despite a lot of developing countries say to us, we don't have the resources, we need to worry about health, we need to worry about the roads, we need to worry about education, cyber, we don't need to worry about cyber. That's not a problem that we have to deal with. How has Ghana been able to understand that this is important, and how have you been able to sort of push this agenda so successfully?
Thanks so much, Ida. But also, Jane, digitalization of mindset. I like this. It's one of the key words I've picked from this session. But before I present what I have here, I would like to apologize on behalf of my minister, who personally wanted to participate in this particular event. She has been leading our efforts in government as far as cybersecurity development is concerned. She's been involved in some of the study tours that has been organized by the World Bank to Israel and other countries. And it's rather unfortunate. It is a busy period in Ghana at this moment, and she was, in the last moment, called in for emergency assignment. So I have been sent to present Ghana's perspective as far as cybersecurity development is concerned. But I think it is also good to express our appreciation to the World Bank as a partner for Ghana's cybersecurity development. And I'm happy we're making progress, and to share, with your other stakeholders so that they know the investment, the commitment, the effort you're making as far as working with Ghana is yielding some positive results. I have some presentation here to share quickly. We are a small country. It depends on which country you're talking about. If you are from Norway, you can't say Ghana is a small country, for example. but we have a population of about 30 million with enough. We are bordered with Burkina Faso, east with Togo, the west with Ivory Coast, and we have a beautiful Atlantic Ocean. Yesterday, we were fortunate for the past 2 days to have the First Lady of the U.S. visiting us. She spent 2 days in our country, and I think some of you have been following, so that is where we are. Ida mentioned something. The moment you talk to, you bring the issue of cybersecurity development within the context of a developing country like ours, Ghana, there are all sorts of issues that comes to mind. And I think most people will highlight on financing. Is it money? Do we have money to invest in cybersecurity? But I think the last few months, in Ghana, we have a different opinion as far as concerned. In other words, why financing is key, not only for developing economy, but even for advanced economies. There are certain fundamental imperatives that you need to get right to be able to develop cybersecurity. And I think those are the things that likely we have been able to identify and work on. But as a country, some of you may be wondering what is the cultural, social barriers to cybersecurity development. And that is where I'll pick the mindset issue here. Whether, the population themselves are security conscious. My minister will say Ghanaians, naturally have a trusting nature. and these are some of the barriers at the social level that impact on our development. When we're talking of technology, a typical example to be able to effectively implement incident response to detect threats in your environment, you need to have a secure technology, a technology network environment that you'll be able to deploy sensors and monitor the environment. So if your public sector is not connected and users using individual computers, how do you actually aggregate the system to be able to effectively monitor? And I think that is one of the areas that the World Bank has identified, and they are doing a project on connectivity to help that kind of environment for us. In terms of human resource, I've been practicing in the country, as Ida mentioned, 6 years in private before I accepted the government advisory role. And initially, yes, there were lack of skills in this area. But currently, we have an issue of skills affordability rather than availability. Where I sit, you have a lot of people coming most of the time with their CVs. Most of them, like myself, studied work abroad before relocating to Ghana. But the question is, can you pay them? How much is the government willing to pay to be able to keep them active working with us? So that is a kind of dynamic that we are seeing in our part. Financing, I've always mentioned, and for the next 50 years, cybersecurity will still be competing with other priority needs of the government. For example, my government has rolled up a free high school education. You need those folks to be educated, at least to that level, which requires a lot of financial commitment. There are equally developmental initiatives that also requires funding. So that is why normally I don't place the argument on financing, because for the next 50 years, you have a lot of things which are equally important competing with you. But the key thing that I would like to bring to bear is a political commitment. How is the political leadership willing to make commitment to cybersecurity, despite the fact that you have equally important initiatives that you still need to implement, both for developmental reasons, but also for political reasons, if I should, quote that. How do you make a case for cybersecurity, for government attention, commitment, focus to be put into cybersecurity despite all these challenges? And I think that is where Ghana has achieved some success in this report, and I will share with you. We took over for the past close to 2 years now, And one of the important areas we identified was to establish a certain governance framework. Governance framework to be able to deal with national cybersecurity issues, because before then, we had partners coming in, individuals, specific initiatives, but we couldn't integrate them into a broader framework for national accountability, for monitoring and evaluation, but even prioritization of cybersecurity interventions. The little money that we have, how do we effectively prioritize them for us to build our capacity? So this is a framework. We had a policy dimension, technical engagement, but also operations. That led us to set up a national cybersecurity organizational framework. It is important to mention that getting political support, commitment requires a kind of consensus building. So the Minister for Communication currently is responsible for cybersecurity in government. But cybersecurity is like octopus. It borders on the work of several other ministers. So you have the Ministry of Communication, National Security, Interior, Foreign Affairs, Justice, Defense, but also Finance. We were able to lobby the president himself to inaugurate this group as a council that coordinate cross-ministerial discussion on cybersecurity. And that was a major step. The reason is, in our part, this is how cabinet works. Those ministers are those with voices that when they speak together, they have a common position on an issue. It will be extremely difficult for cabinet to actually, refuse to accept. And I am happy to report that we had our last meeting about 2 months ago, and it was fantastic. The common agenda, the positioning, and the fact that they are all speaking in one language. We have done well, setting the structures, but the next stage is financing for cybersecurity, of which a common position is being taken in cabinet. So that is the level of, top governmental issues. But I also want to bring to mind, there's a technical level, heads of agencies. So heads of CID, heads of the intelligence agency, heads of NITA, which is a government agency, ICT agency, national communications, data protection, the director of public prosecutions, the judges who work on cyber issues. We form a technical working group, and this group meets regularly every month to deliberate on technical issues in cyber. I chair that group, and I also report to the Interministerial Advisory Council. This has been another successful initiative in getting consensus and having a common position developing our cybersecurity. But the last one is currently where we are, which is the National Cybersecurity Center, which we are setting up. And in developing this, I must admit, we've been engaging with our different stakeholders, including the US government. Elizabeth is here. They've been very supportive. We visited the US also, studying their model. The World Bank took us to Israel, also studying the best practices. So I just want to emphasize that these successes have been achieved through collaborative working relationship with our partners, including the World Bank. So currently, in October, we are setting up, the minister is launching the National Cybersecurity Center. It has never happened before. Even recruiting in the government sector is a difficult undertaking. And I probably would like to raise some of this caution here. When I came into government, one of the things I've seen is there had been major development, investments by development partners. But then you don't have the human capital to manage. I serve as a board member of the National Information Technology Agency. We inherited an infrastructure which is about $400 million US plus. But when we first had a board meeting questioning about the caliber of people who are working there. I made a determination, advised the minister. I don't think we should, talk too much about cybersecurity without having the fundamental, pillars in. We've made good success. World Bank is supporting us with 3 top qualified, affordability issue for a period of a year or 2. But my ministry has also been able to recruit 15 young professionals that we are training them. Because some of those things, the element of sustainability, and I am advocating that the work we do in a development country, we should insist. I think let our government prove the element of sustainability. Please, it is so important for people like us who want to leave a legacy that will live after us. I think that element is key, and I think we address this internally by recruiting those 50 people, but also getting external support for a period of a year or 2. The expectation is this support from World Bank, they will be able to train the people we are recruiting so that they can, even if the support does not continue, we can keep, the system running. 2 minutes, all right, good. I think I have 2 minutes and I'll share some perspectives on what we've also done as far as building our next steps are concerned. Jane mentioned about a relationship the World Bank has with the Cybersecurity Capacity Center of the University of Oxford. They brought them in to do an assessment, and it has been quite successful for us. These were the various institutions which we engaged in those discussions. The CMM methodology looked at 5 stages of development: startup stage, formative, established, strategic, dynamic. Essentially, the findings suggest Ghana is at the formative stage, in between formative and established, because we've gotten key structures in place, but we need to enhance their operational capability and organize the system to be able to move to the next stage. And the finding here is key. In all sectors, we are making, we're making some progress. But a critical element was the mindset issue. That is why I, still refer to Jane, but also awareness creation. And just the 1st of October, the government has launched the National Cybersecurity Awareness Program. So Ghana has, a well-formulated program that seeks to raise cybersecurity awareness. In other words, address the mindset issues among our citizens. And it focuses on 4 key areas: children, public, the business, the government. So these are some of the major steps that we have taken through the support of the World Bank and other partners, and we look forward to further engage both private sector partners, but also agencies and institutions and government to be able to advance our cybersecurity agenda forward. Once again, on behalf of my minister, thanks to the World Bank, especially the digital development team that has been very committed, to Ghana's quest to enhance its cybersecurity. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Albert. That was really interesting. Melissa, sorry, I come back to you again, but you said something really interesting when you were talking. Well, I'd like to talk more about your cyber readiness index, and also just about when you talked about sort of how I interpreted it, the lack of long-term planning and thinking about how to address, these cybersecurity risks as opposed to these very short-term, weekly, monthly patches that people put in place. Looking at it from a developing country perspective, where because of the sort of situations they deal with, they don't necessarily always think very long-term. What are some sort of practical, I won't say practical tips, but how would you advise, what are the things that they need to take into consideration? What kind of strategies should they be thinking about? What are some lessons learned that you would take from, the Maersk incidents and other countries you've been working in?
Well, thank you very much. I wrote a paper recently for the Organization of American States of how to think about managing national cyber risk, and it complements the Cyber Readiness Index, and it's actually in 9 different languages now, so I'm very pleased by that. But the managing national cyber risk is you first have to start to think about what is the core and important to your country. And where are you trying to drive the country's vision? Is it you need to get core infrastructures in place, modernize rail, or actually lay rail, like this would be the case in some of in the Balkans and parts of Eastern Europe? Do you need to connect and get more high-speed internet connectivity to more of your citizens? This would be the case in a good portion of South America, where the connectivity is less than 50%. Do I need to prop up a key area of my economy because it's core to my gross domestic product? And this would be the case for some of the countries that are doing more either shipping or oil and gas or mineral extraction. So let's just say that we actually understand what it is important to our country. From a big picture, these are the thrusts that I'm trying to do. Well, the second thing is then I'd like to, to define who are the most important corporations in my country. Because one of the lessons learned from the Maersk shipping is Maersk actually represents more than 5% of the national GDP of Denmark. And there are core companies that represent, in all of our countries, that represent a more of an aggregate of our GDP than others. And those have to be important relationships for information sharing, for protection, for a private-public partnership, because those companies, whether we realize it or not, are core to our economic health and strength. And then the third part is what a lot of our countries are doing is talking about the critical infrastructures. We've done a great job about that. In the United States, we have 17. And Europe, there's, depending upon the country, it's either between 7 and 12. I was just in Morocco last week. They've defined 15. But we have to start to really get to terms of what are the most critical services. That not all critical infrastructures are critical at the end of the day. Because without three key things, three key services, none of those infrastructures will work. The first is they all have to have power. And without power, nothing else will work. And we have to get to terms to that. The second is telecommunications. Because without telecommunications, there's no free flow of goods, services, data, or capital across borders, right? This is core to our economy. And then the third is we have to have financial stability. The financial institutions have to work, because that is what powers our economy. And I'm going to keep on, I focus always on economics, because that's the story that drives our governments. And to the extent that we can ground everything in the economics is very important. So when you start to overlay that there are really three critical services, what are we doing as governments and as national institutions to ensure the security and resilience of those three key services upon which all the rest of the critical infrastructures are dependent? Now, in the United States, we just had a major alert in April of this year announcing that these key services have been targeted, and we have pre-positioned weapons in the core of our infrastructure. And the director of our national intelligence has said, we have red blinking lights. We have a serious crisis here. And many other countries are talking about the same thing. If you can actually disrupt these three critical services, you've actually disrupted the entire country and its entire economy. So the Cyber Readiness Index builds on this and says, okay, I am going to look at your country in 7 different lenses. The first is from a strategy and policy and perspective, is your digital economic strategy, the economic strategy, the digital agenda, is it aligned with your national security? And, are there published policies? Is there any alignment? And so as I look at this National Cybersecurity Council and things for Ghana, I bet there's a National Economic Council driving the economic vision. Who's the person? Is it Albert? Who's the go-between between these institutions? And so I look for that. We don't have natural places between those two sides. So are they aligned? And then the second pillar of the Cyber Readiness Index is looking at, what is your overall national incident response capability? Do you have a CERT? And this is one of the key initiatives that the bank is funding right now, is ensuring that there's a national CERT, a computer emergency response capability in the countries, especially in ECOWAS, I think is your current initiative. So, but is there also information sharing with those key industry that represent the core of your economy? And are there specific incident response and defensive capabilities that you're doing for those key services that power those key critical infrastructures? Then the third pillar is all about law enforcement. And how are we modernizing our laws to the digital age? In the United States, when I worked for President Obama, we identified more than 80 laws that had to be updated for the digital age. And that's a lot, right? And since in the last 10 years, only 2 out of the 80 have been updated. That's a problem. And so we look at, to what extent are you training judges in the technical aspects of cybercrime and helping get law enforcement capacity? And then to what extent are you working internationally of ratifying the Budapest Convention or the similar convention that's in Africa or in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? And there's about 5 international treaties that kind of fit that space. The fourth area looks at really broad and robust information sharing. And to what extent is that occurring? Government to government, intra-government, government to industry, industry back. Because when there is an incident in your country, if you do not have robust information sharing relationships, a national alert and warning system, it will be a problem for recovery areas. The fifth is looks at research and development, and how are you looking at and developing from an innovation perspective, driving your research and development to modernize your core infrastructures for the 21st century, not the 19th century. And then the sixth area, it looks at foreign policy, that many of our countries, again, are bifurcated, that we're doing trade negotiations and not thinking about the national security implications. And specifically, we're doing data localization. We're creating sovereign clouds. We're actually inhibiting the free flow of goods and services and data and capital across borders through some of these trade negotiations. And then we have a different part of our government that is negotiating rules of engagement, responsible state behavior, and the like. And we have to align our foreign policy objectives, again, from an economic and national security perspective. And then finally, the seventh pillar looks at your national capacity. If your electric grid or the key things of your services were to go down, what is your national capacity to restore? And if you had a sovereign threat, how would you handle it? In some countries, that's the military's responsibility. In other countries, that could be the national police or the security and justice. And still other countries, it could be a different organization, the Ministry of Interior. And so it doesn't have a prescription of what's the right and wrong. It's evaluating what is the capacity in the country, how cyber ready is it in those 7 different pillars. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess I should say, the methodology is available on the internet. It's published in all 6 UN languages. And there are 9 country profiles completed that are also on the internet, so you could look at what those are, or look at them. And we're going to have 2 new profiles completed, I think, by the end of this year, and that will include Morocco and South Africa.
Thank you. Is there any, does anyone want to ask any questions, or do you have any contributions to this discussion? Okay, great, because we'll use the last 20 minutes for that.
Question on one of the items that you just mentioned, which is the law enforcement and the update of laws. With the U.S., and I know this is with regards to developing, but in this particular case, given the administration wanting to deregulate so much and not pay attention to a lot of the laws that are out there, we're taking a step back, at least within the U.S., by not updating these laws in order to be able to enforce cybersecurity crimes. At least that's my perception. I'd be interested in hearing yours.
I think that in most countries, there is an equivalent of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act or the Stored Communications Act or Electronic Communications and Privacy Act. Those are the top three that would be for our cybercrime and other things. But as a signatory and ratification of the Budapest Convention or the European Cybercrime Convention, you have a treaty obligation to update your laws to enable to, one, prevent crime in your own country, investigate and prosecute crimes in your own country, and prevent crime from your country happening against another's country. And so as many of our countries have ratified one or more of these conventions, and they all basically have that same requirement: prevent crime, prosecute crime, and make sure that crime from your territory doesn't happen or be a cause of crime in another territory, is part of our responsibilities. And so, yes, it has things under President Trump. This is not currently part of his agenda, but it was also not a priority under President Obama.
So my name is Elizabeth Vish. I work at the State Department's Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues. And I wanted to thank Albert and publicly commend the government of Ghana for making cybersecurity a political priority. It is an important priority. My question is actually for Ms. Treadwell. As you guys are thinking, as the World Bank is thinking about integrating cybersecurity into your overall programs, can you tell us a little bit about how you're approaching your partner governments, or your clients, I guess, with thinking about integrating cybersecurity, building out cyber from the beginning, and smart security rules from the beginning, as opposed to sort of going back and retrofitting? I think that's an important thing that we run into in many places.
Thank you. I think any of the projects or the analytical work that we do these days will always, from our group's perspective, say, have you thought about the cyber side of the development that you're contemplating? This to our colleagues. And then in terms of with the governments, of course, starting from the positioning, you know, you want to achieve these things, but you also need to make sure that in order for those developments to be successful, you have to protect those developments. So again, the cyber side. We do concentrate on the awareness raising, the exposing the key leaders to what advanced countries are doing. We can gather any number of fearful facts, and I think that they're growing in both industry and in terms of governments, and so it's that dual side. We need to make sure that the efforts are going to be effective, and that the internal awareness raising within the bank complements that which we're doing with our client countries. Many of the bank projects, I think at last count around 70% or so of bank projects have an element of technology or data involved. That will only continue to grow, and we would expect that each of those components would have a cyber element attached.
And I think just to add to that, another thing that we've been doing within the bank as well has been working within the departments. There's a lot of interconnection with all these different critical infrastructures and saying, okay, yes, it's a digital development project, but what about the smart transport projects we're looking at? What about the energy projects we're looking at? Do you want to be an avenue to cyber attacks? So also getting that internal awareness being raised by team leads within the bank itself, from senior level management and down. Another thing we've done is a combination of technical assistance, awareness raising that Jane has raised, where, okay, then you need to bring the ministers, the policymakers to see what other countries are doing, and then also at the same time train the more technical level staffs in terms of things like assessment. So building the political will and also building the capacity, so when they merge together, then our initiatives can move a lot faster. And also one of our biggest challenges we've been facing that we've been dealing with is the mindset in a lot of developing countries that cybersecurity is a defense issue. It's not a civilian issue. It's none of your business. We don't want to talk about it. We're not going to share any information. So getting that awareness out there to say, actually, no, everything you do from your ID card to your phone and your credit card is all cyber related. And even within the bank, getting people to say, we can work on cyber issues because it's not solely a defense issue. So it's across the board. There's a whole range of different issues we're trying to navigate, and sort of avenues like this, and then partnering with other institutions as well has been really great in terms of our resources, so we can work better together. So we're definitely going to be calling you very soon, since you work in Ghana. Sorry, I just took off my moderator hat for a second. But so...
If I may add something to that. I think specifically, as far as integrating cybersecurity into connectivity issues, there is evidence as far as the work the bank is doing in Ghana is concerned. Currently, there is a connectivity project for the National Information Technology Agency, and there is a component on SOC, Security Operating Center. So I think this is something which is going on there. If you look at even this chart, NCA, Bank of Ghana sets are completed. Elizabeth sent his team last week to do pre-operational assessment, and my president is going to launch one of this on the 22nd of October. So as far as the government network is concerned, the SOC is being built as part of the connectivity project. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to round up now, because I think people are getting tired, they want to go home. It'd be interesting to just sort of hear from you guys. We've talked about a lot of different issues, and it seems like some of the challenges in developing countries are the exact same challenges in developed countries. And is it a mindset issue? Is it a capacity issue? Is it a resources issue? Those are things that we're trying to assess. But what are like your last key messages to the audience, but also to all our clients that we have as well, and just to people interested in cybersecurity in general?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think let's help my fellow developing countries to demystify cybersecurity. Funding will always be a problem. It will always be. Where I'm coming from, if you visit a country, you see the developmental gap, you see everything. And we have to be also real and speak to the political leadership. I think it's important, development partners, to face the facts as it is, but also understand that in the next 50 years, we're going to struggle financing. It is really the political commitment that we need to put in place. And I think Ghana is on the path because of this thinking. It is working. We've seen empirical evidence of that. The system is improving. That money was allocated for something that has been moved to support cybersecurity. People say don't recruit, but we've been able to recruit 15 people and they are working. I think that is an approach that we need to take from some level. And I believe we can always engage with our partners to share these experiences as World Bank is bringing ECOWAS to see what we're doing. I think we will be willing to share this. And hopefully we can also sustain this particular vision that we want to take to develop our cybersecurity. Thank you so much for having us.
I guess what I would do if I really wanted to have rapid awareness raising in a country is I would run a national exercise, and I would do a series of scenarios of your major port just got encrypted and it's not going to come online for a month. How is it going to affect your economy? Your telecommunications system was wiped out by malicious software, and this is going to present a problem for 80% of your country. your oil and gas infrastructure has something happened to it. And I would go through the key, whatever the economic centers of gravity are for the country, and show them the overall digital vulnerabilities and explain to them, or have them have to work through the scenario of a bad day. Because all of our countries have seen a bad day in some of these situations. And now if you could just live through somebody else's challenge, and then how would your government work with your industry? And then how would you prevent that in the future, which brings the resilience discussion and investment discussion, and all of the capacities you would need. But right now, there is not a lack of, there's a very poor understanding at the national leadership of how digitally dependent we are, and then how fragile those services are. And if and when they go down, you don't want to be making this up like in real time. And you just really need to have an understanding of how bad your day could be, and then how you would actually work it with your leadership team and then your private sector, and how you would actually then, I would also say, call in the treaty support of the Article 5 or the equivalent of the different treaties you've signed that would require overall assistance, even the UN. So thank you.
It's always great following you, Melissa. But you reminded me of when I was in Australia and we went through a disaster simulation for Centrelink, which was the social security style system that I was in charge of, and we lost everything. And this simulation was a day-long exercise. The executives we all went off site and went through the simulation. That was a powerful illustrator. Being told these stories is not as effective, having to manage through them, even if it's a pretend. And it exposes both ignorance, assumptions, incapacity, the whole range. So that's one thing, but I think the other element is actually recognising that with all of the interconnections, as I think the Israeli people told us on a visit to DC, you're only as good as the weakest link. And so therefore, even in some countries, they might be exposed because of something happening somewhere a long way away. And then, so that's the sort of both the awareness and preparedness, but I think also in terms of the development process, we all should be looking for both the opportunities to digitalise and digitise. But where there is that opportunity, there's also the opportunity to be pro-cyber secure in terms of awareness, steps, processes and capabilities, and that nothing should proceed without the holistic approach.
Great. I just have a quick question regarding data protection and including that as well with the cybersecurity implementation, especially as other countries such as Mexico have currently signed the Convention 108 for data protection in order to do business with the European Union, and looking for possible adequacy. Is this something that is being built into the cybersecurity of developing countries as we're looking into the overall growth for them?
Look, I think the Europeans have done a tremendous service to the world and world governments on data protection, especially with the general data protection regulation, and highlighting, as it has, both the issues and the actions that can be taken. The area that we work with a number of very impressive telecoms regulators, that is now expanding to actually encompass the nature of data privacy and protection. And of course, data is the currency of the digitized world. So it's it too needs to be brought into this space. But I think it's just beginning in that regard, and you see what's going on in Europe and how that's impacting countries and companies around the world, clearly with Mexico's leadership as well. the efforts of the Indian government in regard to Aadhaar and the digitised identity, and then the recent Supreme Court rulings in regard to how that data will be managed. So I think it's that issue I mentioned, and as we've all said, you know, there's a coin here, and there's one side which is the advancement, and the other side which is the resilience and the security that we need to spin.
Thank you. Do you, Albert, Melissa, anything to add to that answer? No? Okay, so thank you, everyone. I hope you guys found this really interesting. And clearly there's lessons learned to be drawn both for developing and developed countries. And hopefully we'll figure it out. Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks for coming. And thank you to the panel. This is a great panel. Albert coming all the way from Ghana, Melissa and her insane schedule, Jane as well, with all the things that she has to get done. And it really means a lot that you guys took the time out to come and speak to us about this issue. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ida, and thank you very much to our panelists. So I think that with the end of this panel session, I think we have reached the end of the session of these 2 days of the forum. I really would like to share with you a couple of closing remarks, very, very short. I won't keep you any longer. So on behalf of the World Bank Group and OASIS, we would like to thank, first of all, the speakers and panelists who share with us their cybersecurity intelligence. Thank you very much. To our sponsors who made possible this event, thanks a lot. And also to the OASIS members and partners for their support. Huge thanks and a special thanks to Jane Harnett from OASIS for making this event happen. Thank you very much, Jane. And finally, but not least, to all of you guys for being over here and letting us share with us, with you, our cybersecurity intelligence in this trusted environment. So right now, all that we have to do is to expand the environment that we have built over here to everywhere we go. And I think it is crucial to enhance the mutual collaboration that we have started over here. And I believe that we have a lot of experts over here in different areas of cybersecurity. We have risk management experts, policy and strategy, incident response, CIIP. So I think that if we enhance everything that we have built during these days, we are going to, build a better cybersecurity trusted environment all around the world. So thank you very much for coming, and let's keep in touch.